I watched my own mother slide my son's beautiful, custom-made birthday cake straight into the industrial trash bin, just to clear off the counter for my sister's engagement dinner. My 6-year-old froze, his small hand slipping out of mine as big, heavy tears rolled down his cheeks. I swallowed the urge to scream, pulled my heartbroken boy into a tight embrace, and walked out of that mansion without saying a single word. But their cruelty didn't stop at the garbage can. Weeks later, an official corporate letter arrived at my doorstep, revealing a staggering venue debt. My sister had forged my signature, stolen my business credentials, and used my hard-earned name to fund her entire luxury wedding. They thought my silence meant submission. They were wrong. So, I agreed to bake her wedding cake for free, unpacked it with a truth bomb that would ruin her high society life forever. How did I expose them in front of hundreds of guests? Subscribe right now to watch the full story and see exactly how a mother fights back. The sweet, buttery aroma of caramelized sugar and fresh vanilla bean has always been my sanctuary. It is the scent that wraps around our cozy yellow bungalow in the quiet suburbs of Connecticut, turning a simple house into a home. My name is Maya Linwood. I am 32 years old, and my hands are almost always dusted with a fine layer of powdered sugar. As a professional independent pastry chef, I spend my days turning flour, eggs, and passion into edible art. People in our community often tell me that I possess the patience of a saint. I suppose they say that because I can spend 7 consecutive hours meticulously piping delicate royal icing lace onto a 4-year wedding cake without a single complaint. I believe in hard work, kindness, and the quiet dignity of standing on your own 2 feet. But above all else, my world revolves around one person, my 6-year-old son, Leo. For the past few years, our lives have resembled a beautifully timed recipe. I am a single mother, and while the road has not always been paved with gold, we have carved out a life that is harmonious, peaceful, and filled with laughter. Our mornings begin at 5 o'clock with the soft hum of the convection oven warming up in my licensed home kitchen. Leo usually wakes up an hour later, his messy curls bouncing as he runs into the kitchen to steal a fresh strawberry or a dollop of whipped cream. He is my ultimate taste tester, my biggest fan, and the center of my universe. Our economic situation is modest, yet thoroughly comfortable. I do not drive a luxury sports car or wear designer clothes, but the income from my boutique home catering business ensures that the mortgage is paid on time. The pantry is always stocked, and Leo never goes without his favorite bedtime stories. Our neighborhood is the kind of place where children still ride bicycles on the sidewalks and neighbors wave from their front porches. In our small living room, an old grand piano stands in the corner, covered in framed photographs of Leo's milestones, his first steps, his first day of kindergarten, and his bright, gap-toothed smile. I grew up in a family dynamic that was far more turbulent, which is precisely why I've worked so hard to cultivate an environment of absolute peace for my son. My mother, Helen, and my younger sister, Clara, have always operated on a different wavelength. They live for social status, expensive labels, and the superficial approval of high society. For years, I was the daughter who was expected to quietly step aside so that Clara could shine. When I chose the path of an independent culinary artist rather than climbing a corporate ladder, they looked down on me. Yet, I never let their judgment disrupt the sanctuary I built for Leo. On a warm Tuesday afternoon, as the golden sunlight poured through the kitchen window, I was putting the finishing touches on a special batch of lemon tarts. Leo was sitting at the dining table, happily drawing a picture of a giant green dinosaur with a crayon. Everything felt perfect. The house was warm, the business was steady, and the air was thick with the promise of beautiful days ahead. But just as I reached to wipe a stray smudge of flour from my apron, the sharp, demanding ring of my cell phone broke the afternoon silence. I glanced at the caller ID. It was my mother. A sudden, unexplainable chill rippled through the warm kitchen, a silent whisper that the fragile peace we cherished was about to be pushed to its absolute limit. I wiped my hands on my apron and answered, keeping my voice as light as possible. My mother's voice instantly flooded the line, sharp and brimming with an excitement she usually reserved only for my younger sister, Clara. She told me that the entire family needed to gather at her estate this coming Friday. When I reminded her that Friday was Leo's 6th birthday, she brushed it off without a second thought. She claimed it was the perfect coincidence, insisting that we should bring Leo's celebration to her house because she was hosting an important family dinner and wanted us all under one roof. For a moment, my heart warmed. I allowed myself to believe that perhaps my mother was finally reaching out, wanting to be a real grandmother to my boy. Leo had been counting down the days to his 6th birthday for an entire year. He didn't want a massive party with clowns or magicians. All he wanted was to spend time with his family and eat the special cake I had promised to bake for him. For months, I had been designing a masterpiece in my mind, a magnificent 3D space-themed cake, complete with hand-sculpted fondant planets, a glowing rocket ship, and edible stardust. It was going to be my love letter to my son, a physical representation of how much he meant to me. The next 2 days became a blur of joyful preparation. My kitchen turned into a galaxy of deep blues, violets, and sparkling silver. As I carefully airbrushed the dark velvet fondant to look like the midnight sky, Leo stood on a wooden stool beside me, his eyes wide with absolute wonder. He clapped his hands in pure delight every time I added a new star or a tiny, sugary astronaut. Seeing the sheer happiness radiating from his little face made every single hour of standing on my tired feet completely worth it. I felt a deep sense of pride. My business was thriving. My son was happy, and we were walking into my mother's house with a creation that represented the pinnacle of my professional career. As we loaded the heavy cake box into the back of my station wagon on Friday evening, a strange feeling of unease washed over me. It was a subtle, nagging sensation in the back of my mind, the way the air changes right before a heavy summer thunderstorm hits. I noticed that my mother had sent me a text message asking exactly what time I would arrive, emphasizing that I should enter through the back door so I wouldn't disturb the aesthetic of the front driveway. It was a small, peculiar request, but I dismissed it. I chose to focus on Leo's excitement instead. He was sitting in his car seat, wearing his favorite button-down shirt, clutching a small toy spaceship, and singing a happy birthday song to himself. We drove toward the wealthier side of town, where the houses grew larger and the lawns more manicured. As I pulled up to my mother's grand brick mansion, I noticed the entire driveway was lined with luxury vehicles, and a valeting service was actively managing a crowd of elegantly dressed guests. This was not a casual family dinner for a 6-year-old boy. My grip tightened on the steering wheel as I looked at the extravagant floral arrangements framing the entrance. Something was deeply wrong. But I took a deep breath, looked back at my smiling son in the rearview mirror, and promised myself that nothing would ruin his special day. I carried the heavy, magnificent, space-themed cake through the back entrance, as requested, while Leo walked beside me, holding the door open with a proud smile. The kitchen was a chaotic hive of high-end caterers rushing back and forth with silver platters of caviar and champagne flutes. As soon as I set the cake box down on the large marble island, my mother, Helen, swept into the room. She was wearing a stunning designer gown, her diamond necklace catching the bright kitchen lights. She didn't look at Leo. She didn't offer a hug. Instead, her eyes locked onto the cake box with an expression of intense irritation. Before I could even speak, my sister Clara glided into the kitchen, looking like a princess in a custom white silk dress. That was the moment the painful reality clicked into place. This wasn't a family birthday dinner for my 6-year-old son. This was Clara's extravagant, high society engagement party to a wealthy real estate heir. My mother had lied to me, using the guise of a family gathering just to ensure I would be there to witness Clara's crowning moment. Clara glanced at the large box, scoffed, and complained loudly that the kitchen was already too crowded for her floral centerpieces. What happened next felt like it occurred in slow motion, shattering the festive spirit we had brought with us. My mother stepped forward, her face cold and uncompromising, declaring that there was absolutely no room for childish distractions on such an important evening for the family's social standing. She grabbed the handles of the heavy cake box. Without an ounce of hesitation, she carried it over to the large industrial trash bin in the corner of the kitchen. With a dull thud, my masterpiece, the hours of meticulous airbrushing, the hand-sculpted fondant planets, the glowing rocket ship, and the embodiment of a mother's love was thrown directly into the garbage, sliding under a pile of discarded food scraps. Leo's small hand instantly slipped out of mine, his beautiful, wide eyes filled with giant, heavy tears as he stared at the trash bin. He didn't cry out loud. He just stood there, his lower lip trembling, looking from the bin to me, utterly heartbroken. The sheer cruelty of the act took my breath away. My maternal instinct screamed at me to react, but I knew I had to protect my son from further trauma. I refused to give them the satisfaction of a scene. I did not yell. I did not engage. Instead, I knelt down, wiped the tears from Leo's flushed cheeks, and pulled him into a tight, protective embrace. I stood back up, looking directly into my mother's cold eyes and Clara's smug smile. Without saying a single word, I grabbed Leo's small hand, turned my back on them, and walked out of the mansion. The glamorous sounds of the string quartet playing in the grand ballroom faded behind us as we stepped out into the cool evening air. As we walked toward our Modus station wagon, a dark, heavy silence hung over us. My chest tightly ached with a mixture of profound sorrow and a new, burning determination. They thought they had simply thrown away a cake, but as I buckled my quiet son into his seat, I knew a line had been crossed. The family I had tried so hard to appease had just declared war on my son's happiness. And though I was bleeding inside, a cold wave of suspicion whispered that this was only the beginning of their malice. The days following that disastrous night were filled with quiet rebuilding. I baked Leo a brand new, even more spectacular space cake in the comfort of our own kitchen, and we celebrated with his truest friends from school. His laughter returned, but the invisible scar left by his grandmother and aunt remained. I focused entirely on my work, throwing myself into baking orders, trying to wash away the bitter taste of my family's betrayal. 3 weeks later, the true depth of their malice was finally unmasked. It arrived on a mundane Thursday afternoon in a thick, registered corporate envelope. I assumed it was a routine inquiry for a large catering contract. Instead, as I slipped the crisp white paper from the sleeve, my breath caught in my throat. It was an official invoice and a legal confirmation of a binding contract from the Grand Conservatory, the most exclusive and expensive luxury wedding venue in the entire state. The total balance due was a staggering $75,000. My eyes scanned the document in absolute horror, searching for a mistake. But there was no mistake. My name, Maya Linwood, was listed as the primary client, the sole event planner, and the legally binding. Attached to the back of the contract was a copy of my business license, my tax identification number, and a signature that looked terrifyingly like my own, authorizing a massive non-refundable deposit. My hands began to shake violently. I felt the room spinning around me. Clara's wedding was happening in less than 2 months, and she had completely stolen my professional identity to fund her dream day. I immediately called the venue's management, my voice trembling but urgent. The coordinator on the other end was perfectly polite but entirely unyielding. She informed me that a young woman matching Clara's description, claiming to be my executive partner, had brought in all my corporate credentials. They had even provided a falsified authorization letter written on my official business letterhead. Because of my stellar credit rating and my flawless tenure reputation in the local culinary community, the venue had approved the premium line of credit without a second thought. If the contract was breached or unpaid, my business would be liquidated and my personal assets would be seized. The betrayal pierced through my soul like a shard of ice. It wasn't just a financial attack. It was a calculated move to completely destroy the independent life I had built for Leo. The mother who had thrown my son's cake in the trash and the sister who had smiled at his tears had conspired behind my back to use me as a financial shield for their society fantasy. They knew I wouldn't find out until it was too late, gambling that I would stay silent to protect the family from a public scandal. I stood in the center of my kitchen, staring at the legal documents scattered across the counter. The bright, harmonious life I had spent years cultivating felt incredibly fragile, threatened by the toxic greed of the people who shared my blood. A profound, icy shift occurred within me. The submissive, peacekeeping daughter who always stepped aside was gone. Looking at the contract bearing my stolen name, I realized my life would never be the same again. It took a deep, steadying breath, my tears drying into a cold, unbreakable resolve. They wanted to use my name for their wedding? Fine. But they were about to learn exactly what that name was worth. I gathered the fraudulent documents from the counter, stacking them with a precision that mirrored my work at the baking table. My heart was pounding, but my mind had never been clearer. I knew that if I reacted with blind anger, if I stormed into my mother's house screaming, they would simply deny everything, destroy the evidence, and use their wealth to paint me as an unstable, jealous sister. To protect Leo and save the business that fed him, I had to be smarter than them. I had to play their game, but by my own rules. The next morning, I picked up the phone and called my mother. I forced my voice to sound defeated, weary, and completely submissive. I told her that I had received the paperwork from the Grand Conservatory. Before she could spin a web of lies, I sighed and whispered that I didn't want to fight anymore. I told her that for the sake of family harmony, and to ensure Clara had the perfect day, I would accept the responsibility. But, I added smoothly, I had one condition to protect my professional standing. I insisted on being the exclusive pastry chef for the wedding, creating a massive, 5-tier grand centerpiece completely free of charge. On the other end of the line, I heard my mother gasp in relief, followed by a smug, self-satisfied chuckle. She eagerly accepted, completely blind to the trap I was laying. Within hours, Clara called me, her tone dripping with fake affection. She treated me like a servant who had finally learned her place, demanding a cake that would leave her high society guests and her wealthy new in-laws in absolute awe. I listened patiently, nodding along, taking detailed notes of every single request. But behind the scenes, my real work began. I spent my nights tucked away in my small office, meticulously documenting every piece of communication. I requested certified copies of the venue contracts, gathered security footage from the local print shop where Clara had forged my letterhead, and compiled a comprehensive financial trail of their deception. Every ounce of pressure they put on me only solidified my resolve. The stress was immense. I was running my regular business by day, fabricating a massive wedding cake by evening, and building a legal fortress by night. My sleep was minimal, and the emotional weight of knowing my own mother was actively plotting my financial ruin was a heavy cross to bear. The rind arose when Clara unexpectedly showed up at my house a week later. She didn't come to thank me. Instead, she demanded that I sign an additional waiver, a document that would officially transfer a portion of my business assets to her as a security deposit for the wedding vendors. Her arrogance was suffocating. When I hesitated, she leaned across my counter and coldly reminded me that if I backed out now, she would tell the entire community that I was trying to sabotage her happiness, effectively destroying my clientele. The sheer audacity of her threat made my blood run cold, but I kept my face entirely expressionless. I looked past her shoulder at Leo, who was happily playing with his toy blocks in the living room, completely oblivious to the storm raging around him. He was the reason I couldn't afford to break. I looked back at Clara, smiled a tight, polite smile, and took the pen. I didn't sign the waiver, I merely scribbled a note delaying the decision, but in that exact moment, the final pieces of my counter-strategy fell into place. The pressure was at its absolute peak. The stakes were my entire livelihood, and the stage was officially set. I threw myself into the grueling process of creating Clara's massive 5-tier wedding cake. My plan depended entirely on securing the absolute cooperation of the venue's management. But 3 weeks before the wedding, my strategy hit a devastating wall. I scheduled a formal meeting at the Grand Conservatory to present my documentation of the fraud, confident that the venue would immediately invalidate the contracts bearing my stolen name. Instead, the meeting turned into a nightmare. The corporate director of the venue sat across from me, looking through my meticulously gathered evidence with an expression of cold indifference. He explained that from a strict legal standpoint, my corporate credentials had been used to secure the dates, and a non-refundable deposit had already been processed. If I wanted to contest the contract now, the venue would immediately freeze the event, launch a full corporate investigation, and sue my small home catering business for breach of contract and lost revenue. If you pull out now, Ms. Linwood, the director said, sliding the papers back to me, we will hold your business fully liable for the remaining $50,000. Your credit will be ruined by the end of the month. I walked out of the building into a pouring rainstorm, feeling utterly defeated. I sat in my station wagon, gripping the steering wheel as the heavy drops drummed against the roof. The crushing weight of the situation finally broke through my defenses. I had tried to play the strategist, but the corporate machinery of the venue didn't care about justice. They only cared about their bottom line. Clara and my mother had trapped me perfectly. If I proceeded, I risked financial ruin. If I stopped, I faced immediate legal destruction. I felt smaller, more helpless, and more alone than I ever had in my entire life. I wept quietly in the dark car, wondering how I could possibly look Leo in the eye if I lost the very home we lived in. When I finally returned home, exhausted and soaked from the rain, I found a missed call and a voicemail on my phone. The voice belonged to Julian Vance, a high-profile corporate attorney in our city. My heart sank, assuming it was another legal threat from Clara's wealthy future but as the message played, my breath caught. Julian wasn't calling to threaten me. 2 years ago, I had baked a highly complex, custom cake for his daughter's charity gala, completely turning around a last-minute disaster for his family. He had never forgotten my kindness or my professionalism. Julian explained that he had recently seen my name on the High-Valier registry list at the Grand Conservatory, where he also happened to sit on the executive board of directors. Knowing the typical scale of my boutique business, he found the massive $75,000 liability suspicious and decided to check in on me privately. It was the tiny, unexpected glimmer of hope I desperately needed. I called him back immediately, my voice thick with emotion as I explained the entire situation from the very beginning, from the moment my mother threw Leo's cake into the trash to the forgery of my business license. Julian listened in absolute silence. When I finished, he didn't offer empty pity. Instead, his voice was firm, reassuring, and filled with a cold, professional steel. "Maya," he said softly, "you have been carrying a mountain on your shoulders. But you are not alone anymore. They used your name to build their fantasy, but they forgot that your name belongs to you. Keep baking that cake. We are going to give your sister a wedding reception she will never forget." The morning of the wedding arrived with a heavy, suffocating heat. The Grand Conservatory was transformed into a sea of white orchids, silk drapery, and gold-trimmed chairs. Hundreds of high society guests, local politicians, and members of the groom's incredibly wealthy family filled the grand ballroom. Behind the closed doors of the catering kitchen, I stood before Clara's wedding cake. It was a massive, 5-tier towering monument of pristine white fondant, decorated with delicate, hand-spun sugar lace and cascading white roses. To the naked eye, it was a masterpiece of pure elegance. But beneath the flawless, sweet exterior lay the explosive truth of our family's dynamic. When the time came, the catering staff wheeled the magnificent cake into the center of the grand ballroom under a dramatic spotlight. The crowd gasped in collective admiration. Clara and her new husband stepped up to the stage, radiating smug satisfaction, while my mother, Helen, stood nearby, wiping fake tears of pride from her eyes. Clara looked toward the back of the room where I stood in my plain white chef's uniform. She gave me a subtle, condescending nod, a silent acknowledgement that she believed she had successfully used me, broken me, and discarded me. The master of ceremonies clapped his hands, inviting the bride and groom to cut the cake. But right as Clara raised the silver knife, Julian Vance stepped forward from the VIP table, holding a microphone. As an executive board member of the conservatory, his sudden presence on stage immediately silenced the room. "Ladies and gentlemen," Julian's voice boomed through the speakers, smooth and commanding. "Before the bride cuts into this magnificent creation, we must acknowledge the extraordinary effort behind it. This cake was baked by our city's premier pastry chef, Maya Linwood, and Maya has created a special, interactive presentation for this high society event." Clara's face instantly paled. My mother took a sharp step forward, her eyes darting around the room in sudden panic. Before security could react, Julian nodded to the projection team. The massive digital screens flanking the ballroom stage, originally meant to display a romantic slideshow of the couple, suddenly flashed to life with a glaring high-definition image. The entire room went completely silent. It wasn't a photo of Clara and her husband. It was a crystal-clear, heartbreaking photograph of the industrial trash bin from 3 weeks ago, with my 6-year-old son Leo's beautiful, ruined space-themed birthday cake sitting inside it, covered in food scraps. A collective whisper rippled through the hundreds of elite guests. Clara dropped the silver knife onto the floor with a loud, echoing clatter. But the presentation wasn't finished. With a single click, the screen changed again, displaying a massive, legally certified copy of the venue contract. Highlighted in bright, glaring red ink were the forged signatures, the stolen tax identification numbers of my business, and a formal corporate fraud report bearing Clara's legal name. The tension in the room exploded. The groom's parents stood up from their front row seats, their faces twisted in absolute shock and disgust. My mother rushed toward the stage, screaming frantically for the tech team to shut the screens down, but Julian's legal security team blocked her path. The trap had sprung perfectly. The pressure was at an absolute breaking point, and every eye in the room was now locked onto me as I walked slowly down the center aisle toward the stage. I moved with a calm, unshakable grace that none of them expected. The whispers of the high society crowd washed over me, but I didn't feel small anymore. I climbed the stairs to the stage, looking directly at my sister, whose face was completely stripped of its usual arrogance, and my mother, who was hyperventilating in sheer humiliation. Julian Vance handed me the microphone. I took a deep breath, looking out at the crowd of hundreds of wealthy strangers, the groom's furious family, and finally, my own flesh and blood. 3 weeks ago, I began, my voice clear, steady, and echoing with absolute dignity through the grand sound system. My mother threw my 6-year-old son's birthday cake into the garbage. She did it because she believed his happiness was a distraction to the social status of this family. I walked away that night in silence, because a mother's first instinct is always to protect her child from cruelty. The room was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. Clara's new husband looked at her in absolute horror, slowly taking a step away from her on the stage. But silence is not submission, I continued, turning my gaze fully to Clara. My sister believed that because I chose a humble, honest life for my son, I was weak. She believed she could forge my signature, steal my business credentials, and use my hard-earned reputation to fund a $75,000 fantasy wedding without my consent. She used my name to build this lie, betting that I would protect her secrets to save the family from public shame. Maya, stop this instantly, my mother hissed from the edge of the stage, her voice cracking with desperation. You are ruining your sister's life. No, mother, I replied, my voice dripping with an icy polite finality that cut through her manipulation. Clara ruined her own life the moment she decided that my son's future was a price she was willing to pay for her vanity. I am not here to cause a scene. I am here to reclaim my identity. I reached into the pocket of my crisp chef's jacket and pulled out a thick set of legal documents. I walked over to Clara and placed them gently onto the gold-trimmed cake table right next to her dropped knife. These are official, legally binding affidavits of identity theft, fraud, and a formal rescission of the corporate guarantee, I said, looking her dead in the eye. As of 2 minutes ago, my name has been legally removed from every single contract associated with this wedding. Julian Vance and his firm have assumed full legal authority over the fraud report. The $75,000 debt belongs entirely to you, Clara, and the venue has already initiated the cancellation of the reception. A collective gasp echoed through the ballroom. The groom's father stepped forward, announcing loudly to the entire room that his family was withdrawing their blessing and exiting the venue immediately. Clara collapsed onto her knees, sobbing into her expensive silk dress, while my mother buried her face in her hands. Realizing their social standing was utterly destroyed, I looked down at the towering, untouched 5-tier cake. With a soft, final smile, I turned away from the chaos, handing the microphone back to Julian. I walked off the stage, down the aisle, and out of the ballroom, leaving them to face the heavy consequences of their own choices. I had protected my son, saved my business, and taught my family that my dignity was something they could never afford to buy. The doors of the grand conservatory closed behind me for the final time, shutting out the sounds of Clara's frantic weeping and the chaotic shuffling of fleeing guests. Stepping into the bright, warm afternoon sun, I felt a physical weight lift from my shoulders. The air felt lighter, sweeter, and completely free of the toxic expectations that had suffocated me for decades. I drove back to our cozy yellow bungalow, the steering wheel no longer slippery with anxious sweat, but held firmly by hands that had successfully defended her child's future. The fallout from the wedding reception was swift and entirely self-inflicted for my family, because I had legally removed my name from the contracts before the event officially concluded. The full liability of the $75,000 fell squarely on Clara and my mother, without the financial backing of the groom's wealthy family, who annulled the marriage immediately. Clara was forced to liquidate her expensive designer wardrobe and luxury vehicle to settle the debts with the conservatory. My mother's grand brick mansion was no longer a hub for high society parties. It became a quiet monument to their ruined reputation. They received no violence, no harsh public tirades from me, only cold, unyielding reality of their own financial and social consequences. Meanwhile, a beautiful, unexpected transformation began in my own life. A guest at the wedding had captured a video of my speech and Julian Vance's digital presentation. Within 48 hours, the footage went viral across the state. But the public didn't see a dramatic family feud. They saw a hardworking mother standing up for her child and her professional integrity. My email inbox, which usually held a modest 10 to 15 inquiries a week, exploded with hundreds of messages from people wanting to support my boutique catering business. Local families, corporate executives, and even high-profile event planners reached out, all wanting to book the matriarch of marzipan. They didn't just want my baking skills. They respected the values behind the name Maya Linwood. Julian Vance's corporate firm officially retained my services as their exclusive dessert vendor for all their upcoming charity galas, ensuring my financial stability for years to come. With a flourishing stream of income. I didn't buy a mansion or designer gowns. Instead, I invested directly into our future. I expanded my licensed home kitchen into a beautiful, professional independent studio just down the street, hiring 2 talented culinary assistants to help with the overwhelming demand. For the first time in my 32 years of life, I wasn't just surviving the crumbs of my biological family's affection, I was thriving, building a legacy that belonged entirely to me and my son. Every evening, as I walked from my new studio back to our home, I watched Leo playing safely in the front yard. The shadows of that terrible night at my mother's estate had completely faded from his bright, happy eyes. He was safe. He was loved. And his mother had ensured that his world remained a sanctuary of peace. My business was secure, my conscience was completely clear, and a magnificent new chapter of our lives was unfolding beautifully before us. 6 months after the storm that nearly upended our lives, the air in our new professional baking studio was thick with the familiar, comforting scent of roasted hazelnuts and sweet cream. It was a Saturday afternoon, and the sun cast a warm, golden glow across the stainless steel counters. Today was not a day for corporate clients or high society galas. Today was the day of Leo's rescheduled, official 6.5 birthday celebration, a new tradition we decided to create together. The studio was filled with the sounds of genuine joy. A dozen of Leo's closest friends from school, along with their parents and our wonderful neighborly community, gathered around the central island. Julian Vance stood near the door, smiling warmly as he watched the children play. In the center of the room sat the guest of honor, a magnificent, towering, space-themed cake, even grander than the one that had been discarded months ago. It featured edible solar systems, meticulously detailed sugar rockets, and a bright, glowing sun at the absolute pinnacle, symbolizing the light that had guided us through our darkest hours. When it came time to blow out the candles, Leo didn't look at the cake with sadness or hesitation. He looked up at me, his eyes shining with absolute trust and adoration. He wrapped his small arms around my waist, burying his face in my flour-dusted apron, and whispered, "Thank you. Mummy, you make the best cakes in the whole universe." As he blew out the candles to a chorus of cheers and applause, my eyes blurred with tears of profound gratitude. This journey taught me an invaluable lesson about the true meaning of family. True family is not defined by a shared surname, a genetic bond, or the superficial approval of high society. True family is built on a foundation of mutual respect, unconditional love, and the willingness to protect one another when the world grows cold. I learned that keeping the peace is never worth the price of your own dignity, and that a mother's fiercest power lies in her ability to establish unyielding boundaries for the sake of her child's happiness. We did not need a grand brick mansion or luxury status to be whole. We only needed our integrity and each other. As the guests happily enjoyed their slices of cake, I stood by the window, looking out at the peaceful neighborhood. The painful memories of my mother's cruelty and Clara's betrayal had finally transformed into a quiet, empowering strength. They had tried to use my name to elevate their own lives, but in doing so, they only forced me to realize the true power and value that my name carried. I had reclaimed my identity, secured my son's future, and baked a life that was sweeter than I ever could have dreamed. What would you do if your own family pushed you to your absolute breaking point to save their own social status? Have you ever had to cut ties with toxic relationships to protect the ones you love? Let me know your thoughts and emotional experiences in the comments below. I read every single one of them. If this story of a mother's fierce love, resilience, and ultimate triumph inspired you today, please give this video a thumbs up. Share it with someone who needs to hear this message, And don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss our next emotional drama series. Thank you for watching, and remember to always stand tall in your own truth.